Thanks very much for being here, and thanks for class, and especially Lou Samanda for putting this panel together. I think this is something that's been on a lot of our minds and that we want to hear about, both from the kind of the local issues and the larger issues. This is the second version of this panel that I guess four of the people that were on this panel now were on this last year as well. And they came together just before the Trump administration came into office to talk about what to expect. And I watched a video of that because we were out of the country at that time. But the basic thing you come away with was there were an awful lot of fears and a lot of worries. But they were prescient. I was thinking about what Sheila said in that talk, especially in talking about how the new administration would be better armed this time around, getting around some of the legal restrictions that limited them last time. Monica, who I'll introduce everybody in a couple of moments here, she talked about the worries for families and being ready for whether a family member might be picked up by ICE and deported. Michael Goodhart talked about the anti-immigrant fervor in our country and what it meant to society, and what to expect and how society might fight back. A lot of those fears, as everybody knows, have grown into reality. I'm guessing that most of you will say that it's worse than expected. So much so that we considered, although not recording it, but we decided that we will go ahead and record this webinar. In the paper this weekend, Rahm Emanuel called the ICE under Trump a lawless mob. And there are reasonable concerns that Trump is organizing that group, plus other aspects of his law enforcement organizations, including potentially the military, part of a private army who can direct against his political enemies. And to emphasize, it seems that even participating in such a panel as this, not attending it, and expressing concern about the plight of immigrants might be enough to land someone on his enemies list. As Nate Harper said last year, our immigration system is broken, and it's been broken for a very long time. And the people that are paying the price for that are not the people that created the problem. Part of what makes this problem so politically menacing is that those opposing migration have an easy bumper sticker message. They broke the law by entering the US. But of course, the problem is not so easy. Many have pursued refugee status. Many have risked their life and limb to flee horrendous conditions in the countries that they're coming from, often that are the result of other US policies. And most of the immigrants have been central contributors to our society, building families and businesses. Another way I like to think about this is that further, jaywalking and speeding are also ways of breaking the law. The key to a reasonable policy then is what should be the consequences for this infringement. Should it be more like a ticket for speeding or more like prosecution and incarceration for breaking and entering? Of course, the Trump administration has taken this latter view without even a consideration for the statute of limitations, let alone context, families, or circumstances fleeing gang violence. Our goal today, I think, is not to have such a calm talk about what rational policy might be, because by virtue of your being here today, I suppose that everyone's relatively informed about and concerned with how the United States, under our 47th president, is forcefully, and I would argue inhumanely, targeting, arresting, and deporting immigrants. I presume then that the people are here today to discuss what is happening in our community, how national events will redound to Pittsburgh itself, and think about the responses that we might, ways that we might respond. Our speakers, in short, I think are going to give some detail about what the New York Times this weekend called Trump's war on immigrants has meant for Pittsburgh and the rest of the country. How is it affecting families? How is it affecting our society? How are people resisting or trying to fight back? Let me call out the people a little bit here. For Dr. Mónica Méndez, she's the policy director for the Latino Community Center. How have families tried to protect themselves under this situation? what are community groups doing to try to help protect them? For Nate Harper, I'm going to include Ankur Sakaria in this as well. Nate is the former director, get this right, of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs for the city of Pittsburgh. And Ankur is the now the policy manager to our new mayor, Corey O'Connor, who has that portfolio overseeing public policy and governance initiatives for the city. The question, I think the basic question for them is, how is the city reacting to the federal government policies, and how is it readying itself for increases in ICE activity in our community? We'll then turn to our two academics on the panel, Dr. Sheila Vélez from the law school. She's the, get her title correct, the Jack and Lovell Olender Professor of Refugee, Asylum, and Immigration Law. Is also the co-director for the Center for Civil Rights and Racial Justice, and the director of the clinical programs for the Immigration Law Clinic. So I hope that she'll be able to talk about, although she's sick and can barely talk, but has a slide, she'll present this, about the legal tools for immigrants and what they have to protect themselves, and a little bit of the change of what those legal rules did. And then, excuse me, and then Michael Goodhart, who's a professor of political science, where I am. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm sorry about that. Scott Morgenstern, Department of Political Science, former director of the Center for Latin American Studies. But Michael Goodhart is a colleague of mine in political science. Is also a professor of courtesy in the philosophy department, and also of the gender, sexuality, and women's studies, and previous director of the Global Studies Center. And so he's going to talk, I think, a little bit in a broader context about the conflicts we've seen in Los Angeles and Minneapolis, evolution, change, and what this has meant for our society, and perhaps his elections approach later this year. Before I turn it over to the speakers, though, I wanted to add two more little thoughts that I've been thinking about and writing about with regard to this issue. And one is how the Trump administration is different than previous administrations. So I was looking a little bit at the Obama administration, who became known as the deporter in chief, and got an awful lot of criticism from his own supporters for that. And it's true that during Obama's period, during his administration, 400 or 500,000 people were deported a year during his presidency. And he earned that name, though, because many of those people that he was deporting were recategorized. There were people just coming across the border, and he removed them. They changed the terms from returns and removals, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not condoning this by any means, but this is quite a different thing that's happening under the Trump administration. Obama really had people at the border. Well, Trump has gone into the interior of the country and is working to deport. Last year, Sheila noticed one other difference that I want to mention as well. That the term that I've learned is called, Trump is using a post-priority policy, where his only concern is deportations, nothing else. In the past, under Obama, there were priorities, criminals that were deported. This is no longer the case. There's virtually no policy tolerance under this policy, no matter how long someone's been here, whether they have children, a business, a home, et cetera. Further, he has overcome the legal barriers that, again, Sheila had pointed out were important last year that slowed his attempt in his first term. He's also has this huge budget allocation that he's given himself for the deportation. As a result, as the data now for 2025 says he's deported almost 300,000 people. And since he's effectively shut down the border, almost all of those people are people from the interior. It should be noted that only about a third of those 300,000 have any kind of criminal record at all. Half of that number is for traffic violations of one sort or another. Note that he said he wants to deport 1 million people a year. So trying to imagine what this effort would be if he tripled his effort in the following years. The last thing I wanted to mention is that another worry I have is about how Trump has vilified the immigrants, which is very different from Obama, who at least outwardly suggested some compassion. Trump's policy has not only torn families apart, I think it has changed the American narrative in a country that is supposed to be known as a place that welcomes the stranger and protects the innocent. As such, it's been so polarizing that an important part of our society views immigrants with suspicion and hatred, which is dividing our society and fomenting crises like we've seen in Los Angeles and Chicago and Minneapolis. So far, Pittsburgh has avoided the worst of this crisis. It is evident in the weekly vigils in the ICE building, 8:30 on Friday mornings on the south side, and hundreds of people signing up for emergency responses with Casa San Jose and with Jaime Martínez, who I've got information about. Forgot to introduce Lou's mad at me, and I'll do it in a minute. That there's people are worried here and concerned about things, and they're working with Latino organizations in the city, but people are very worried about what's happening here, and many people feel it's only a matter of time that these fight come to Pittsburgh. So I think this maybe sounds a little ominous, and I hope, although I kind of doubt that the speakers will disabuse me of this, but we're going to see what happens, and they're going to be able to tell us about this. Let me give the rest of the speakers the microphone in 1 second, but as Luz put out on the table outside, there's a couple of resource guides here. That this is from Jaime Martínez, who's now founded and from Center for Latin American Studies, also helped put this together. There's some cards about information about what to do if people are approached by law enforcement officers, and also a postcard about this series, which is called The Border to Border. Okay, with that, let me turn it over to our speakers. We're going to start with Dr. Méndez, right? And then we'll turn it over to the other people in the city.
Thank you for having me. The Latino Community Center, I don't know if a lot of you know about what we do. We've been here since 2017, and we were founded on the premise of community. We want to make sure that the Latinx, the Latina, the Latino, Latina, Hispanic community, however you choose to say it, has a place in the city. We are one of the fastest growing populations here, and we understand that economic development is going to be on the shoulders of a lot of immigrants and refugees that have come to Pittsburgh. Before I tell you a little bit about what it looks like on the ground, we work directly with families. I want to reiterate something that was just said about the state of the situation in which families come, because this is part of the discussion, and it's a part of the discussion that a lot of people tend not to hear, either because they don't want to or because they don't understand. When individuals come to the United States, some people come here as a choice and some people come here as a necessity. Think about it this way: when if some people come because they find opportunity here, they find another job. Think about it when you move, when you go looking for a job, you will go to where that job is, right? So you're looking towards the future. If your house is on fire, it's an emergency situation, okay? So there's a huge difference between choosing to leave a home and then needing to leave a home, okay? A lot of the families that are coming from Latin America, mine included, are coming here out of necessity. My family came here 40 years ago, and it was a complete upheaval. We left our extended family, we left the language we knew, the job, friends, the family networks and supports, the food that we knew, everything, in order to find opportunity here, because my dad was a whistleblower. And so they basically closed off economic opportunities for him. The United States welcomed us, and a corporation welcomed us and allowed us to be here. That's a privilege. We have a lot of families that are going through traumatic events in order to look for the opportunity that the United States supposedly can provide for people. It's not a choice, it's a decision. And it's an extremely difficult decision. We have had families, we've done research with some of our families who have come from South America, and they have walked or hitchhiked or paid, indebted themselves in order to get to the United States for opportunity. Okay. Out of emergency because of gangs, cartel, violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, threats on their children, lack of economic opportunity. I mean, I'm trying to set the stage for you all so you understand that some people come here as a choice, other out of necessity. The families that we work with are mixed status families. They have perhaps parents who are coming here that are undocumented. And just so you all know, we never ask about documentation status at the center, okay? They come here and they are seeking assistance. And I have to tell you, I wish a center like the Latino Community Center or Casa San Jose had existed when we first came here, because it's extremely difficult to acclimate to a new country. The families coming here have various needs. From last year to this year, the needs are completely different. The families right now are in crisis mode, okay? They are in fear of going to doctor's appointments. They fear going to school, sending their kids to school. So we have truancy situations. They fear going to the store. Some families are starting to send their children, different ages, to the store because they know that the adult can get picked up and the children are less likely to get picked up. They don't want to go on buses. So basically, a population that we know was already isolated. We have done research. We worked with the University of Pittsburgh to do research around this topic. Those families, we did this research 2 years ago, were already experiencing isolation. The kids were already experiencing isolation. Now it is tenfold. Just in the last 5 months, we have had 4 cases of attempted suicide by some of our youth. These are kids 14 to 18 years old, okay? Suicide as a result of bullying, of harassment that has been going on in the schools. We have, I don't know if you all are aware, 43 different school districts in Allegheny County. Some of those school districts are absolutely amazing when it comes to working with immigrant and refugee kids. Some of the schools are making it a lot more difficult right now to prove residency for our families, because the kids can't even go to school if the parents are willing to send them. I have to say, Pittsburgh Public Schools has been amazing in setting protocols. They allowed us to go in, talk to their counselors. They allowed us to go in and talk to their principals and vice principals to work on protocols with them, just so that they had a better idea of, okay, how do we handle these cases? We knew truancy was going to be up, and it is. So they have worked with us to make sure that the parents are not sent to court when there are truancy cases. There's a huge fear right now of going to court or going anywhere where public figures, where police, where anybody might show up with a uniform or as a representative of an organization that is seen as a tool. Okay. So the community has been absolutely amazing in responding to the needs, but the systems are very slow. Okay. We have organizations like the United Way that have opened up funding so that we can send Ubers to pick up families and take them to medical appointments that they would have otherwise missed. We have organizations and ERGs, employee resource groups, that have been collecting diapers, that have been collecting culturally appropriate foods for our families, which I have to tell you, if you think about it, you know, here in the United States, you can grow up eating mac and cheese and you're good, right? Like a lot of people know about that. Like you put that in front of kids, especially kids who have recently arrived to the United States, and they will not eat it. They will not eat it. And that's a serious issue because the food that they are being fed at school is sometimes the biggest and warmest meal that they're going to have during that day, okay? What we are seeing right now is that ICE, the federal enforcement, whatever they go by, they're taking the income earner. So they are leaving behind the families who then have no economic support. Why? Childcare is costly. 2, maybe the spouse is the only one that has the ability to have a work visa. Maybe the parent, usually the woman, doesn't have a skill set that the community deems appropriate. They don't have resumes, or they were used to be a doctor in the country of origin. They come here and it's not worth anything. So there are choices that people make, and the person who does unpaid work at home, the childcare, the caretaking in general, the cleaning, all of that stuff, is the person that is left behind to figure out how the heck to pick up their life after the income is gone. And I have to tell you, we are at the point right now where PHDC, it's an organization that we work with that helps with rent. They help finding jobs. They're amazing. They can only give rent for one time for one family. And we are running out of resources for rent. We have 2 families right now that we're not sure how they're going to be able to pay rent. And we're trying to figure that out. The social nets are depleted in a lot of ways. But like I said, our communities are absolutely amazing and being able to figure out, okay, our executive director, Rosa Maria Cristallo, is amazing, really well connected. She knows who to call if we have to buy plane tickets. And that's what we've had to do. Find plane tickets for people who are self-deporting, right? And when they have a choice. We're contacting governments in Latin America. We had one case where the person needed to go to Guatemala. The problem, she had fled Guatemala because of severe domestic violence and possibly femicide. And so we had to talk to organizations in Guatemala in order to try to figure out how to get her safely there and safely away from the town that we knew the abuser was in. So these are very complex situations. The safety nets that we have in our communities are not ready for what is going on. And right now, when we're needing to work more and more closely together, the funding is disappearing or it's getting more complex. The federal funding that sustained the refugee organizations out there is gone. So what does that mean? If you look at it from a business perspective, now they're coming, those organizations that we need to survive are competing with all the other organizations in order to get the funding that we need. Okay, so I know this is bleak, but the thing is, this is the reality that our families are living in. It is fear, it is isolation, it is increased contact with medical need, mental health assistance, and mental health is very taboo in Latinx populations many times. So you can imagine the issues that we're having in trying to get people to talk. So that's a small view of what is going on. More than happy to expand on it.
Thank you. I forgot to mention, we agreed that everybody would talk about 10 or 12 minutes, and then we'll have a few responses, and then we'll open up to questions. So we should have plenty of time. I think let's go to Nate next to talk about what happened under the previous city government, and then we'll move to Ankur after that, for the current.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here again. Again, my name's Nate Harper, and I'm the former manager of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. And it's a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to be with everybody here, especially Ankur, who is carrying on with the work under the new administration. Last year, really, one of the things that I really spent a lot of time talking about was about the potential economic impact of what all these immigration enforcement operations would potentially do. And but in many ways, when looking at the broad swath of things that we thought could be done by the Trump administration, as we did scenario planning, we've come to see that the vast majority of those things actually were done. We were not overreacting. Obviously, immigration enforcement operations have been ramped up all throughout the country, throughout our city, deputizing different parts of federal law enforcement agencies, bringing in the National Guard, and obviously Congress passing a very large budget for it. One of the things that has been a really disturbing and frustrating trend has been how immigration statuses and policies around that have been changed, particularly around temporary protected status, deferred enforcement departure, and and also the policies around asylum seekers. Effectively, putting people into from a valid legal status to a status that is no longer valid from a lawful resident or lawful visitor status. And that switch therefore opens up those individuals and those families to being targeted by these immigration enforcement activities. There has been a reduction of refugee numbers. I think it's 7,000 is the target this year, with the primary focus on white Afrikaners. And also from outside the United States, it's very difficult for people to gain visas and to come visit family and come here. The students. So these are macro level changes. And so what can city government do? And often I think people will look to us saying, what can you do? And some of the things that we've really focused on is effective communication with our immigrant communities and immigrant serving organizations around the policies of the city. And I think it's very important for residents in the city to be able to see that we are not lending public safety dollars and public safety resources towards assisting federal immigration enforcement activities. At the same time, we've been very clear, and I'm saying it in present tense, but it's all in past tense, so forgive me for that. But we're very clear that we cannot protect people from that either. That a lawful immigration enforcement action or activity is something that city police and city officials cannot get in the way of. And we always would encourage people to not put themselves in a position where they themselves could be targeted too. But I find it very interesting what's happening up in Minnesota with the boundaries that are being pushed in Minneapolis from protesters. And also interesting trends coming out of cities like Chicago, where they're exploring how civil statutes could be made at the state level that would criminalize the racial profiling that's happening by these immigrant enforcement actions and the officers there, which therefore could expose the officers to prosecution on civil statutes. So there's a lot of different ways that cities are looking at this, but the overall posture of any administration really was to lay low, to not draw attention to the city. And in return, and this was not necessarily a top-down decision. This was very much informed by community-serving organizations that had agency through relationships on the floor, and but also through our office as well. But we also recognize that there were residents that wanted us to do more, particularly around creating ordinances for the city, including in city code, enshrining the protections that are already there now, but in policy, not necessarily in city code. So some cities that you would call the sanctuary city policies or welcoming ordinances, and there are some residents that really want to see that kind of work and those types of steps being made by public officials. And it's whilst I think the Gainey administration was very open to that, the general concern, especially after he lost the primary, was that this would draw attention to the city, and therefore more attention to the residents themselves, and would cause more harm than good to our immigrant residents in the city. And recognizing that we in Pennsylvania, we are in a very mixed state. We've got tons of red counties all around us. And it could get something like that could, in this climate, would have drawn a lot of attention. But I'm sure it's still something that is being considered. But ultimately, the protections that sanctuary or welcoming ordinances would provide are already in city policy now, either through public safety policy or executive orders like that. So those protections are there, those emphases are there in order to make Pittsburgh a welcoming place. So, in terms of I guess how much time do I got?
2 minutes.
2 or 3 minutes. I think I'll just answer the question you asked about what has surprised me this past year. And I think the first thing really has been around there's a bit of a division community around sanctuary ordinances. You know, and it's not coming from a bad place, either side. But it is there, and it does make some feel like Mayor Gainey and that administration wasn't doing enough. And it makes others feel that maybe some people in the community are trying to do things without them being involved or something like that. So there is division there. But I think overall, it's been the thing that surprised me the most has been how much the Trump administration has been able to push the envelope as it relates to limiting due process, the racial profiling involved with the tactics, and the immunity that the federal immigration enforcement operations happen with impunity. So this is a real challenge for our city, our country, and courts have been kind of effective in some areas of pushing back. In some areas, it's not been effective, and a lot of really good work happening by the ACLU and different national organizations that the city has joined in different lawsuits to push back on federal policies that have changed. But ultimately, we're just really in the middle of a really tough time, and the only thing I could think of in terms of focus on, other than what people are doing right now, pushing back, is the midterm elections, because there needs to be more resistance from Congress. So I'll leave it at that.
And now to bring us up to date in the new administration and the O'Connor administration, we'll ask Sakaria to fill us in.
Scott, and thank you, Nathan, for some of your words. I'm going to jump around a little bit. There's a lot to say here. The question posed was, how is the city reacting and readying itself in light of the sort of the directives that we're seeing from the federal government, immigration enforcement being squarely within federal government's purview. So a few things. How is the city reacting, readying itself? In many respects, we consider the good work of our predecessors in certifying that welcoming city designation. That took a lot of work and a lot of community organizing. Nathan had mentioned that this was a decision that wasn't informed by cops so much as it was informed by folks in this room and folks out in the community on the ground, advocating for families and kids who are the direct target of some of this policy in these directives. So on one end, we ready or respond to this by continuing that good work. I think within that as well is building upon ways in which Pittsburgh can actually be welcoming. That means language accessibility. That means economic security, right? Those are policy areas, and I think quality of life measures that either make or break someone's ability to thrive here in the States. And frankly, I don't need to look so far than to see how important or how important that is. As a first generation Indian American myself, I was born in Queens, New York, to two parents who came from abroad and settled down, and I could experience firsthand some of the struggles that they went through that allow me to be before all of you sitting on this panel. It is quite a humbling experience being here. It's the two professors who taught me and I researched under, be in the same room as Mr. Harry Cloman, who was my Pitt News advisor at Pitt. My call to this work is not only because of my personal background, but in some of the professional commitments that I've made as well. I graduated from law school and moved to DC to work in public interest, where I was representing kids and parents, but kids identified with disabilities, and fighting against discrimination on behalf of Muslim Americans, many of whom didn't have this opportunity, and didn't have some of the opportunities, some of the privileges that we exercise as Mónica. So coming back to those policy areas, we can ready ourselves by continuing good work and listening to the progress that's been made and building off of that in some very targeted ways that try to address the quality of life gaps that we see across the communities that exist here in Pittsburgh. I think to also comment on some of the landscape here, knowing that the federal government controls this bucket, municipalities, cities, states, they all have a responsibility. And in some respects, this isn't new. And in a historical lens, this is definitely not new. And you can use some of those historical examples to kind of inform what work we can do now. I think when you look at a Chicago or a Minneapolis or a New York, kind of see what folks are grappling with, what works, what's not working. Some of what we see eroding right now is protection around those protected areas. We see the proliferation of 287 agreements, which from this administration's point of view, we have absolutely no desire to sign on to or participate in. But when we talk about how cities like Pittsburgh or other cities can ready themselves, it's got to require a legal and a legislative and an educational strategy. I think we all kind of touched upon in different ways. Legally, you can see that there are those challenges against, those DHS directives stating that protected areas are no longer a thing, that ICE can come in front of a human services organization or a hospital or a courthouse and wait, right? On the legislative front, it might be looking, it might include looking at ways in which states can start sort of coloring those protections, folks that live here. That also means, defining how our public safety departments interact with federal law enforcement officials. And I think more to the point, respond to what most of us in this room can agree are unlawful and unconstitutional action. And then from the educational standpoint, I think there are ways in which we can organize. There are ways in which we can share critical information about what to do in these, instances, which are happening here in Pittsburgh. right? And then also understanding from a community-driven perspective, how we can best support each other. And I know we'll get a little bit more specific into all of those things and happy to talk about that. But I thank you for your time and hopefully I was responsive to that question.
Thank you. Sheila, if you're healthy enough, you have one slide that I think is going to summarize a bit so that she can speak less, and pictures worth 1,000 words, right?
I mean, I could just say, I'm sorry first, I don't have a voice. I've been fighting this cold for the last week and hope that today I was able to, but let's see. So I'm gonna summarize it in a phrase that I've been using lately to describe immigration policy at this time by the Trump administration, and it's no one can come and no one can stay. If you're this is what we are talking about. Because at this part of the conversation that we were having, this slide I have updated through the year. I created this like almost a year ago, start summarizing the policies, and I've been playing with it. And a lot has not changed, but it has grown. And I think that there's some things that are salient is that policies of the current policies of the Trump administration affect with the same intensity those that seek to enter the United States legally or undocumented, and those that are present in the United States without documents, as well as those that are present in the United States in the process of being documented. So there's really not a safe spot. Not even being a citizen of the United States, because the Trump administration has targeted both birthright citizenship and naturalization, and have created a denaturalization task force. So some of the policies that we've seen are policies that are executive order policies, or and when I say EOs, I include executive orders, policy changes, proclamations, statements, and just run-of-the-mill standard operating practice, SOPs. And one of the things that has remained and grown throughout this year is the propaganda language. So the propaganda language, the propaganda imagery to a level that I surprised that this level of this imagery was being used. I have started following, I don't know why, the official U.S. Department of Labor, social media. If you haven't done it, do it, because it is the closest thing that I've seen to Soviet era government propaganda that you can imagine. Just go and look at that. So it's that has grown. It has not gone away, and they have felt strengthened and supported to continue doing that, because contrary to the tariffs, for example, policies and other policies of the Trump administration, that affordability related policies and other policies that might not have been as attractive until recently, their immigration policies continue to have wide support. I think that there's a shift right now after the militarization, the extended militarization of DC, Portland, Chicago, and now Minnesota. I think they're losing the I think they're losing the popular opinion on Minnesota. Let's see how much, where does that take us? But they still have, like I said, they still have this propaganda language throughout, and they have increased using that. The border continues to be closed. Self-deportations continues to be the policy. So I would say that the policy is attrition by cruelty. And we have seen consistent practices that are not only defying due process, but they're defying basic human rights on purpose. Right? There are law enforcement mechanisms that exist that are extreme, but that are within the boundaries of law enforcement practices. What we have seen in Minnesota and elsewhere are beyond what are accepted law enforcement practices. These are militarized practices with the single objective of imposing cruelty and fear, and also retaliating against communities that, which is, you'll see, so retaliation is a policy. Policies of retaliation against communities that resist, against people that resist, retaliation against politicians that resist, retaliation against judges. There are a series of federal court judges that have been arguing that they are afraid that they are being targeted, that their house are being surveilled, that people are writing to them because they have not been allowing Trump's policies to continue. And retaliation against attorneys, against institutions of higher education, against those that have been opposing. So retaliation has continued to be a policy. It is a policy of this administration. We have seen the suspension of refugee admissions increase, that will extend not only to new refugee admissions, but also to those refugees that are already here, their ability to become legal permanent residents, their ability to bring their family members, that has been curtailed. We have seen not only that these refugees are being curtailed in moving forward in their immigration journey, but that there is an attempt from the Trump administration to reopen the refugee adjudications for the last 4 years. The refugee and the asylum adjudications for the last 4 years. We have seen increased attention in ways that we have never seen before. The Trump administration has reinterpreted a 29-year-old law and case law regarding who gets to have bond in the United States. And they have decided that no one that enters without documents can have bond. It has huge consequences for the community. This is one of the policies that has the most impact in communities across the country. There are at least 2 federal courts that have ruled against this, and the chief immigration judge 3 days ago sent an email to all immigration judges to disregard these opinions by federal courts. Have close to 800,000 people that have been left without status that entered with status. So it's also removing legal status from those who had it. So this is why I say that it is both closing the borders to those that want to enter legally, as well as those that try to enter without documents. The same is true for closing the ability to stay for those that have already legal status or were in the process of legal status in the US, as well as those that were undocumented. because you're targeting undocumented people with detention, but you are removing ways of legalization for people that are already here within within the process to obtain legal status, and those people that have TPS that are applying for asylum, people that are refugees that are trying to become legal permanent residents, people that are trying to bring their family members. So the travel ban for 19 countries, have been extended to include 75 new countries that will not get visas issued to come to the United States. The 75 countries is almost like half the countries in the world. And this is that they're unable to come legally to the United States. And that includes work-related visas as well as family-related visas. So once again, no one can come, no one can say. This is the migration expression of the isolationist policy that you have seen the Trump administration in other areas, and which has been the conversation over the weekend. So this is how that isolationist policy is also reflected in the immigration realm. One of the most recent policies are policies related to removing those that are applying for asylum to the United States to third countries. So the administration has entered with safe third country agreements or asylum country agreements with Uganda, Guatemala, Ecuador, El Salvador, and St. Kitts, by the way, also recently, St. Kitts, to terminate the cases of people that are applying for asylum and sending them to those countries to continue their asylum in those other countries. That is the most recent area of litigation that we're seeing. Courts are not yet ruling on those that widely. It would be interesting what happens. It is surprising that immigration courts have widely gone with this scheme by the Trump administration. But we'll see. This is what's happening right now on the grounds, and this will affect thousands of people that have been applying for asylum. But this is not happening to people that just entered and applied for asylum. This is happening to people that have been applying for asylum, following the rules regarding asylum in court, filed their cases and been waiting for adjudication of their cases for years, some of them over a decade. So these are people that had work permits, that had family in the United States, that have gone through the process. So the doors for living in the United States as an immigrant are coming to the United States are effectively closed. There is no real pathway that is easy. There is no real pathway that is without obstacles at this time for most people that want to come to the United States or to remain in the United States, to do so without a feeling of fear and uncertainty. And that is what that is where we are, unfortunately.
Thank you. Looks like talking about this.
I'm gonna say there's something hopeful, right? I'm gonna say that there's something hopeful, is that U.S. district courts have been, and U.S. district court judges, silent heroes in this process. There have been hundreds of cases filed challenging the policies. And in more than 100 of those cases, there have been preliminary injunctions, and judges have been trying to stop the blatant use of force the lack of due process. In most of the cases, the Trump administration is not appealing because they know they can't win. They have been choosing the cases that they appeal. We're waiting for the Supreme Court to rule soon on the birthright citizenship. I think this case is going to be extremely important and for the communities and for the policies of the Trump administration. So that is a good thing. On the other side of the Supreme Court, however, we have to make it clear that the Supreme Court is responsible for what is happening in Minnesota. So what is happening in Minnesota would not be happening in the same way, with the same impunity that surprised you, without Justice Kavanaugh's creation of the Kavanaugh stop. This go ahead for this brief detention that has zero consequence in your daily life. This weekend, a Vietnamese old man that is a US citizen was dragged outside of his home in his underwear by ICE agents that broke down the door. And this is allowed because under their interpretation of what the Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh said, that was, a brief stop that no consequence. I just hope he can't sleep at night.
Story. I'm going to say, talking about this, it looks like it gave you more strength in your voice, more strength.
Yes, then I'm gonna collapse and die.
We need you out there for the fight. And your phrase "attrition by cruelty" is something that will stay with me. That's quite a phrase. Michael, we'll turn it over to you for the more good news.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Let me start off by saying that things are in fact worse than I expected last year in a number of ways, which may be mostly a failure of my imagination, actually. Interestingly, not so much on the migration front, simply because it's every bit as bad as I thought it would be. I think I said last year there was going to be a lot of sadistic theater around arrests and deportations, and we've certainly got that. Not that I'm happy to be scoring highly here. The numbers are higher than I thought, and that's, I think, largely thanks to this ending of the TPS. I was kind of wondering where we're going to come up with all these people, and that one hadn't occurred to me. So again, failure of the imagination. There have been the exceptions I imagined in agriculture, food processing, hotels, et cetera, where Trump keeps creeping up on that and industry keeps pushing him back. So that's just a good reminder that you can't tell this story without talking about the Capitol, which is not something we're inclined to do very well in the country. Well, the ICE presence is worse than I even thought, though. The National Guard deployments have also been a real problem, and those are related in a way I'll describe in just a second. On the higher ed front, we talked last year about using the financial levers to achieve their goals. That was sadly another one for me. But it's been worse than I thought in terms of the reach of it. They've gone for much more than I imagined they might go for on that front. And while the compact moment seems to have passed, the individual settlements are devastating. You should expect those to continue with anti-ICE demonstrations perhaps becoming the new pro-Palestine pretext of 2026. Also, the war on DEI, critical race theory, gender ideology, whatever that is all even more than I anticipated. Maybe the biggest area where I didn't expect things to be so bad was foreign policy, mainly because I naively thought he would ignore it. Look at Argentina, Honduras, Venezuela, Iran, Nigeria, Greenland. People are really struggling, I think, to figure out what's going on. So what I want to do, because I'm a political theorist and this is what I do, is try to connect some of these dots and put them into a slightly bigger framework for you. And a larger framework can be described, I think, uniting foreign policy, the attacks on higher ed, the domestic policy, et cetera, in 2 words, white supremacy. Let me elaborate. This is a way of describing what fascistic politics means. It's a politics of domination. And so one needs the theatrical violence. That is what fascistic politics is all about. Trump's foreign policy is like the twisted love child of Samuel Huntington and Patrick Buchanan. I mean that image to be as ugly as it is. Huntington's clash of civilization framework fits naturally with the idea of each civilization having control within its own sphere of influence. In this case, the Donroe Doctrine, so-called, is purely about dominating our hemisphere. Greenland, I think, is the purest example of this. He will take Greenland if we're here next year at this time. That'll be another one for me. And I think part of the reason, and this is sad and pathetic, but this is the world we live in, he needs something big to announce on July 4th. It's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And what could make America greater than making it bigger? And maybe slapping some gold paint on it. But making the country 25% bigger would be just the kind of thing that our president loves to do. Sadly, I'm not joking about this. He will do it. I'm in earnest. And they are too, sadly. If you forgive the phrase, this is grab them by the pussy as a national security strategy. This is what we are facing. Ironically, Trump doesn't see that by grabbing Greenland, he's acknowledging the reality of climate change, because that's the only reason Greenland is interesting to them. In the climate situation, the damage is dire and sadly irreparable. A future world much worse than this one was already baked in, and now the heat is literally being turned up daily. So I gave you that image of Huntington and Patrick Buchanan. Within this clash of civilizations framework, stuff like replacement theory fits right in, right? And you can see a sort of logic emerging to this anti-immigration politics, all this sort of cruelty, and so on. So this is how you can reconcile the seemingly nonsensical idea of, on the one hand, you get Maduro kidnapped, but then massive ongoing deportations of Venezuelans and Cubans at the same time, right? Surely lots of the Magachado right in the Venezuelan diaspora has been baffled. But Trump doesn't care about them or their country or democracy or human rights. He wants to look tough and control the oil. That's it. Trump was never anti-war. People mistakenly thought that he was anti-war. He's just anti-sticking around. Again, grab them kind of national security thing. And all the rest of the domestic agenda stuff fits in here too. The anti-woke, anti-DEI, anti-queer stuff on the domestic policy front. And let me bring it back a little bit specifically to migration, because this is so clearly, as I think Sheila was just saying, about domination, right? This is the point of it. It would be one thing to arrest and deport people according to the established legal procedures. Obviously, that's not what's happening. Now, probably we need a political economy of migration that tries to understand what the presence of unauthorized migrant workers does for the US and the global economies, right? And that's a bigger conversation that we can maybe get into in the Q&A if people are interested. But in the meantime, it doesn't matter if he makes exceptions here or goes back on something there, right? The point is the spectacle. By the way, it's not like people somehow hate migrants naturally or by default, right? They get minoritized. They become despised and scapegoated through being mistreated in these ways. Right? This is something that critical race scholars have seen really clearly. Racism precedes race. Right? You racialize people by being racist toward them. Right? You demonize migrants by deporting them, by beating them up, by dragging them out of their homes in their underwear. A violent spectacle is the point. You mistreat migrants to make them into the kind of people that it's okay to mistreat. Now, why do you do this? Again, because the violent spectacle is so important to the politics of all this. It doesn't make sense conventionally, of course. Fascism never makes sense conventionally. Deporting people doesn't lower prices or solve affordable housing or whatever, despite crazy theories that they roll out. They actually have no interest in solving those things. Right? The goal here is to preserve the economy functioning as it is, not to fix it. That's how fascist politics works. As Antonio Gramsci once said, fascism is the attempt to solve economic problems with guns. Can't do that. So it doesn't solve anything, but it does provide a kind of psychological gratification for those who are fully identified with the leader or the movement or the race or the nation or whatever it is. And so the violence is necessary because it provides both something for those people who aren't getting anything on the affordability or housing or healthcare or whatever front. It provides some kind of gratification, right? Some kind of affective release for the cognitive dissonance of the whole situation. And this is the updated version of what W.E.B. Du Bois called the psychological wages of whiteness. Right? Those wages don't pay the rent, but they're still worth something. Anyway, my friends, all of this does not bode terribly well, I'm afraid to say, for the near future, because the violence is the point and it's going to expand. The point of sending the Guard to LA or Chicago or occupying Minneapolis, again, is the spectacle. It's also a warm-up for Trump's invocation of the Insurrection Act. He's already previewed that, musing about what would happen if at the end of his term, we happened to be in the midst of an insurrection, and he therefore had to suspend elections. Chuckle, chuckle. You think his tweets or truths or whatever they are idle, ask them about that in Nook. Whether he's worried enough to try it for this fall is another question. There's also always the option of just declaring fraud after the fact and sending in the Guard to seize the voting machines. He's already said he regretted not doing that last time. Again, in light of remarks like these, it's remarkable to me that Machado or anybody else thought that he gave a damn about democracy. I want to say one thing about it, and this is picking up something else that Sheila said. Policies don't have to be popular in order to do their political work. They just have to keep the base fired up. You don't need 50%, you need like 20 to 30%. And this matters because when the election suspensions or the nullification of the results comes, the big question really is, can the opposition put 20% in the streets? This may, I'm afraid, be a moot point. Democrats can't seem to figure out that lots of people think that Palestinians are human beings and that taxing the rich makes perfect sense. They can't figure out that a lot of people are indifferent to democracy at this point, as it hasn't addressed their problems. Theodore Adorno observed in his masterful study, The Authoritarian Personality, many people probably come to actively resent democracy for the way it fails them. People like these are not going to be motivated by more grave words about the fascist threat or fundraisers with Liz Cheney. Josh Shapiro, I think, is at much greater risk than he realizes, though with that ego, that's not saying a lot. It means that come next January, things could be even worse for us still. Pennsylvania is one election away from being North Carolina or Texas or Florida. Anyway, my point is that nothing about Trump's behavior to date suggests that he's willing to lose another election. It may mean not having one, it may mean ignoring the results. Either way, it's going to take more than no kings style rallies to counter him. People are going to need to be in the streets and stay in the streets, and a lot will hang on how many people are willing to be beaten, shot, jailed, tortured, so on. Realize that what I'm saying is heartbreaking and enraging and demoralizing. It's our responsibility not to let it be demobilizing. Just your being here is a small but crucial act of resistance and solidarity. We're going to need a lot more of both. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to Klaas and Luz Lamanda for organizing this. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Michael. You didn't disabuse me of my pessimistic view at the beginning as well. I have lots of questions, but I think it's time to let the audience, who I'm sure has a lot to say, and ask some of the panelists. So, Chris, you can start.
Okay. As much as that last comment would like me to get into a discussion about the legitimacy of going beyond nonviolent protests, I'm going to save that for later. I want to ask about justice. We kind of talked about this earlier. The perpetrators of what's happening right now are state actors. And the words of J.D. Vance, they have absolute immunity. I was interviewing a local representative for a forthcoming bilingual newspaper published in March about the importance of prosecuting hate crimes. Because the crime is not against the individual, it's against the community. Tree of Life is kind of the example in Pittsburgh. That was not against those 11 people who died. It was against the entire Jewish community, probably the entire non-white, non-Christian community, if I'm being completely honest. And what we're seeing with these crackdowns, not just the deportations, but the raids, the violence, the deaths we've seen, it is not attacks on individuals, it's not an attack on their status, it's an attack on who they are as people. Not what they do, but who they are. They're federal actors, they're state actors, they're not going to have any, there's not going to be any justice, I don't think, in this administration. But looking towards the future, what does the path for justice look like? Because to me, it looks like a truth commission, like what we have in Latin America after dictatorships happen. Because I'm just wondering, how on earth can there really be a full, procedure of justice when the victims are not even being given due process in courts? When the victims are being deported due to administrative errors and being sent to what are effectively concentration camps in El Salvador. I really have to wonder, what does justice look like? And then after that, how far down do we go? I'm thinking once again, kind of Nuremberg. Are these ICE agents going to just be able to say, I was just following my orders that I was given? So, and if you would like to chip in on that, I'd like to hear it.
What I can say convincingly, I don't know where this go, like what is the path to justice? What I can say convincingly is that it's not through the court, okay? The courts are not a remedy for injustice. Courts are insufficient remedies. There might be part of so much more complex amalgam of mobilizations and organization, but it's not at all a sufficient path for justice. So the way the legal system in the United States is designed, going through the courts to vindicate rights or to obtain justice, which are not the same things, always puts the onus on those aggrieved, always puts the onus on those that are victimized by this. That is unsustainable and is not a path to justice. So what it is and what does it look like, I think that is part of a very necessary collective conversation. But the path through change is closer to what Michael is talking about, which is what we need. And without that, we won't even get close to what we're aspiring to.
Can I follow up? First, thank you for the perspectives, for inviting us in very provocative ways to think about the imminent reality, I think, of what happens next. And so, Sheila and Michael, I wanted to sort of build and ask a question about, so immediately in the next 12 months, what does this look like, right? And are we prepared in a city like this, right, to actually be out on the streets long-term, winter months, freezing weather, right? And who are those folks that need to be out there, and what does that look like, right? Because to Monica's earlier point, and full disclosure, I sit on the board of the LCC, and I know what it's like when city government actually doesn't communicate properly because there are no language access points for our people. Let's just be honest about that. And so when the nonprofits are doing God's work to the people who need it the most, what do the rest of us need to do to gear up for what's next, right? We talk a good game and we say all kinds of things. The question is, what are we doing to prepare for what's coming?
Say a couple of things about a lot of acquaintances on the left who are quite cynical about things like the No King protests, which they view as sort of orchestrated release valves to, take. And that's not totally wrong. But it's also incredibly important that there be opportunities for people who have never attended a protest, never held a sign, never shouted a slogan to feel safe going out and doing that for the first time. Because they're going to have to do it the second time and the fifth time and the 20th time at some point down the road. So I think going to that stuff matters, and taking somebody who's not gone before. I mean, I have things to say about the people who organize those things, about they're organized like it's not still 1968, newsflash. Like no one knows those songs anymore. Like anyway, but still it matters. Right? Second thing is, like, I made a note, it's even before your question, like, what can we be doing? Everybody should be, back to everybody. Everybody should be making a plan to spend 7 to 10 days in the streets. What are you gonna do with your kids? How are you gonna keep your job? Do you have enough paid time off? Are you willing to go up for a general strike? Like, how are you gonna make sure you have like, these are things that need to be thought ahead about. Right? And I don't know exactly how you coordinate a conversation like that on a mass level, but we have know your rights training, but somehow we also need like plan for, the fight for democracy training, right? And it's very mundane at some level like this. Or if you're going to feed your cat when you go to jail overnight for a weekend because the judge doesn't want to bother himself or herself been arrested, like all that stuff. I said I'd come back to everybody, and then I'll stop. Although I could probably go off on that topic for a long time. It can't be the already vulnerable people who are out in the front of this.
Thank you.
It cannot be, right? It's got to be people who look like me, right? Not that we don't need everybody, of course, but like, to the extent that anybody has privilege, like, now is the time to use it like as a shield and as a weapon, right? And I'm not dismantling it later, but like for now, like, let's just deal with the reality that's right in front of us. I mean, and actually, I said this last thing. This is a semicolon to the last thing. So this is really the last thing. Part of dismantling it is using it in that way, right? Taking the risk on yourself, putting yourself in the front, doing the things, right? This is easy to say. It's not always easy to do. And so I really think planning for it, envisioning it. How bad would it be if I actually had to go spend a night in jail with a bunch of other people who are fighting for the most important thing there is to fight for? How bad would that be? Right? How will I react? What's on your phone? Think about all this kind of stuff, right? Like, these are the kinds of really mundane things. And maybe a task force or a group needs to be put together and actually brainstorm like what this looks like. But I take comfort from the fact that, like, when CASA did the trainings for volunteers for the ICE monitoring, or now with Jaime and the frontline dignity thing, right? Like, people are showing up, not just the usual people, right? Like, people who live in the East End are showing up. That's a good thing, but we got to build on that, and we got to be ready, right? Because if we're not ready when it happens, it's already too late.
If you would like to respond to that from a different perspective, from the city or from the community center.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say a word here is when we talked a little earlier about being strategic. Making the case is a quality of life issue, not only because it is, but because that resonates with, I think, all can identify groups that wouldn't be the first raise their hand to volunteer for a protest or a sit-in or contacting their state reps. And of course, there's the strategic component of what to do next and how to do it and how to communicate your values. But if this moment is showing us that we all need to be united and organized, it is government's role in service to be that connective issue. And the ways in which we can do that is by making it abundantly clear that, you know, this injustice here has ripple effects. And fundamentally changes what we even define as justice, let alone how it might impact every one of us. So that's why I kind of use the term as quality of life. This moment, like those in the past, have affected certain people's quality. But in this year, living as interconnected as we are, it's affecting everybody's life. So making that case to everybody here in the city is, I think, a response to our government.
I could say something about that really quick. If you've never had a conversation about white supremacy, that's a privilege. It is unbelievably uncomfortable. And here in Pittsburgh, it is one of those things where you don't realize that you should be having the conversation. You don't realize how much your identity affects how people treat you. I've been described when I first got to Pittsburgh 12 years ago as a white passing Latina. I never thought of myself as white. These are conversations that we're having to have internally in case ICE comes to our organization. Who has the privilege to be able to go and talk and look at the orders and the warrants? Who has that privilege? Have those conversations. Start thinking about and bring it up to your friends. Our families are having to have conversations about who their kids are going to stay with if they are detained and or deported. Like, these are serious situations that they're facing and that we're facing. And thank you for saying that the people who communities marginalized should not be the ones out there. We have been trying to disappear ourselves so that we can keep doing the work that we're doing. And that is a slap in the face. And at the same time, it's what we need to do. And we will continue to do that.
Put one more quick plug in for the vigils in front of the ICE building on Friday mornings. It's an impressive array of people. More people have been showing up, run by various religious groups usually. And it is the privileged people who are showing up from the East End and elsewhere. And it is create some solidarity, if not ourselves out for arrest yet. But people are, I think, are moving in that direction. I forgot to, online. Well, can we do this one first and then online since he's already.
I got a couple points. I heard that, he could have did a better job. A lot of people don't understand. He's a black man, first black man as mayor of the city of Pittsburgh, and that was a problem. He got 300 right to know acts a quarter, 1,200 a year. You have to have, you literally have to hire somebody just to handle the right to know acts. So he's being attacked left and right, and we're not doing nothing about it. That was a big problem. Now, new administration, prayerfully, they won't have that same issue. You know what I mean? So there will be a little bit more room to wiggle to do more policies and immigration and otherwise. We're talking about training. I'll be the guy with the camera at the protest, coming and talking to you and interviewing you. Know what you're talking about. Don't just grab a sign that you think was cute and hold that sign, because I'm saying, hey, you're holding this sign, you believe that this was going on, what are your thoughts about it? And you have no clue. You have to do training about policy and what you're saying at protests. It don't matter to me. I'm in the news, I have to be unbiased. You know what I mean? If there's a protest for Israel, I'm covering it. If there's a protest for Palestine, I'm covering it. You know what I mean? It's news. That's my job. It's my opinion does not matter. But when I'm coming and talking to you, no matter what protest you're at or what event you're at, have to know what you're talking about. Because it hurts your cause no matter what your cause is if you don't sound intelligent when you're going on the news. Now, I literally had to scrap several different stories because of this. If it's an organizer, if it's someone participating, you can't sound crazy if you're talking about, certain policies. And if you're saying, just for example, Trump is a fascist, and you're saying that, okay, well, what is your reasoning for that? And you don't have no idea whatsoever. And some people don't even know what a fascist is, but we're saying it, you know what I mean? And then we're on the news saying it. So, I mean, we have a lot of, the fight, no matter what the fight is harder when you don't know what you're talking about. So if we're doing training, maybe don't just show up at the protest, call the organizers, talk to the organizers. And again, it don't matter to me what the protest is, what it's about. Everybody needs to do that. Again, if it's organizers or participants, there has to be some type of training points. You know what I mean? If you're out here chanting, Trump is a fascist, then everybody that's there should know what a fascist is and why you think Trump is a fascist, period. Because if not, then it hurts the cause. You know what I mean? And again, like we talk about racism and we talk about white privilege, but we're all in the room. Who protected Ed? Nobody. No offense to Corey. I love Corey. I got no issue with him. I'm just saying we have a significant figure in the city of Pittsburgh running the city of Pittsburgh, and we're letting people attack him. That was a problem, and nobody did nothing. No stories about it. Nobody coming out and saying, "Hey, we shouldn't do this." And a lot of people didn't even know about it. You know what I mean? Which is another issue. But when we're in government, we just say someone didn't pick up the trash. Whose job is it? The mayor. Someone took the chairs out of my parking spot. Whose job is it? The mayor. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not really true, but that's how we act. You know what I mean? So if something didn't happen, we just blame that guy. We don't blame who's at fault. You know what I mean? So we definitely need to do a training on policies before we even move out to go protest. And that's a way forward. Because if you don't do that, then you're just going to keep on doing this for the next 30 years and having the same fight.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for the comment. I get this question and I'll let you respond.
She's had her hand up before. Oh, no, that one
yeah,
first, then I can ask.
Is this different? Yours is different than the one
Yeah.
online? I thought you were telling me to. From our,
Thank you. My name is Audrey. I'll be reading out questions from the Zoom chat. It says, related to Belkis's question, with our different positionalities too, within higher ed or at nonprofits, etc., what can and should we do? What can we do together and how at our different levels? And yes, to Michael's point about privilege.
What can you do? There's a lot that we can do. And it depends where you are and who you are. For example, if you are wealthy, you can be paying rent for the people that need rent to be paid. So if you can't be in person, you can use your resources to support the organizations that are doing the work that have no resources to guarantee living conditions. And because we're thinking the big picture. So we're all thinking, okay, how do we unseat this? Like how do we undo this? How do we find a way for this not to ever happen again? And if you are just thinking about that, which is important, you might not be also thinking of the objective material conditions that the people in the community are facing and are living, and that it's also important. So if you're not the person that knows about policy and can talk to the journalists about policy, you are the person that can help support the Latino Community Center and improve the living conditions of these communities so that cruelty doesn't achieve its goal of attrition. So that is a very specific, direct way where people can help improve or just help communities be sustained at this point in time.
I mean, it is about basic needs, but it's also about educating yourself, understanding the different situations and what does that mean. I think we have a lot of people sitting on the sidelines right now because they don't feel that any of this affects them. We can't do that. So like question the people around you, ask them, you know, like, what does this mean to you? If one more family is in a position where they can't pay rent because the income earner is out, they've been detained. Like, how can I volunteer? How can I drive people around to medical appointments? Get your clearances. That takes forever now. In order to volunteer with a lot of our organizations, whether it's Casa San Jose, PHDC, the Latino Community Center, JFCS, JCF, it doesn't matter. I never get that right. Thank you. We're gonna need clearances from you. Just get them. Because otherwise it's gonna take forever. Right now, especially with the federal government, the way it's sitting, just get your clearances. Start moving forward in one way or another in order to respond to what is going on, but educate yourselves.
I want to see more people using their social media and their influences around this issue. I want to see more people writing opinions about this and publishing them. I want all these people that are not knowing what to do to sit down and write about this and send opinions and provide a different narrative from the perspective of privilege. How does this also affect all of us and affects you and provide a different narrative? That is something that people can also do. People have to organize. There's really no other way. I have been part of very successful social movements that took a long time that ended. For example, the only way that the people of Vieques, which is a small island of the east coast of Puerto Rico, were able to defeat the U.S. Navy and get them out of the island, it required years of struggle and more than 1,000 people. Right? And I'm not saying that we need 1,000 people in prison. What I'm saying is that it needed a collective, multi-sector, consistent, organizing, purposefully activism. That is what, for the long term, that is what we need. For the short term, we also need to improve the lives and protect the lives of those that are still here.
I think, nothing to you.
No, to you, Nate.
Okay. I think it's important to focus on the areas that we do have control. We have the ability to act and do things. Some things I've written down. We did a survey among the organizations in Pittsburgh and it had over 100 responses. And we asked a question to them about if you could dream what Pittsburgh would look like, welcome to the city in 3 to 5 years. The overwhelming theme of the response is investing in the fundamentals that enable stability and opportunity. That's affordable housing. That's reliable public transportation. That's inclusive economic development. These are issues that are not sole needs or areas of impact for immigrants, but for everybody in our communities. One of the things that Ed Gainey was really good at was focusing on the margins, the people that are in the margins of our community, to help them rise and help the city work for them. And the assumption, the principle was that if it starts to work for them, it's working for everybody else too. But it was hard for him to kind of get the message out, or for people to accept, was that it didn't feel like it was working. you know, and that's a broader narrative. That's a broader perspective of our city and what it should look like. We are in the shadow of the great industrial revolution of Pittsburgh, and we live off of that. You know, in the whole Rust Belt, generally, like there's a lot of poverty, and why so many people gravitate towards fascist politics, essentially, who are economically impacted by just the how favorable the society is for people that want to make money, a lot of money. But I think another thing that we have control over is going and talking to people, being a part of people's lives. A month ago, I went and helped an immigrant buy a car. That process was really painful. It was very difficult for process because I don't understand it as an American who's lived here my whole life practically, and trying to explain it to somebody that's been here a year. But that process was very helpful for that gentleman, who therefore his economic opportunities increased drastically by his ability to travel where he needs to go. I go up to up north, up to Mercer County or Crawford County, and the farmer I like to go see and find milk from every time I'm visiting our family cabin up there. And immigrants are very important for the farming community. I like to go talk to him about it and hear what his thoughts are. I know he's a Trump lover, but this is an area where I don't know that Trump's really helping him out a whole lot. You know, having conversations and seeing what he's saying. Family, man, this is tough whenever we start talking about this with people that we love. But engaging still, having those tough conversations, trying to kind of keep it in realms of where we actually have, I like that point back there, where we can actually speak intelligently. You know, I can't convince people in my family how ridiculous some of the policies are right now, but I can tell them where my main concerns are personally, you know, and it's hard for them to really come back at that, you know, and that is, you know, my wife has a green card and my children were, you know, dual citizens, and, you know, I try to pull, or my friends are this way, and I try to really kind of make it more personal, folks, and testing the different ways that we can be human with one another. There is a real important, serious conversation we need to be having about protests and pushing back at that level, but also recognizing where the justice system and legal system is really working well. I'm really glad Ankur's in the role now because he has that legal background that I didn't have whenever I was doing it, and that's important. It'll matter in terms of efficacy moving forward.
You guys answered my question, but mostly is, I wrote my son. Because I don't want other people telling him what we tell him or what he sees, but I wanted him to hear from you what's going on, because it's a reality that really at schools they don't talk about. Which in a way it's a safe space, but there's no discussions. There's no, so how we, the community, because in 2028, we're gonna be able to vote. Oh my God. And he will be legal then, an adult now, but how do we approach that? Because now he's sitting here and he looked at me with, you know, because it's a reality. And that's what we need to face. There's a reality that in a way we're wishing for protest and we're gonna do this. I had a hard time going to a protest because I was like, we're not ready yet. We're not, but I don't understand why I was not ready yet. And that's the part, and he brought it up, and it's part of it. I have information and I know why I'm gonna go now. But the reality is my husband and I have discussions too, what we will do if something happens to us and we go to a protest. So he might go, and he's 6'1", blonde, blue eyes, so I always go, you first. Because we need that representation. I see it because I'm an immigrant, I'm a USA citizen, but it doesn't matter anymore. I carry my passport card. So that is the faith that I want my son to understand, but how do we do it in communities of privilege? Because the school he goes to is a school of privilege, but they don't talk about it. How do we prepare that next generation? Yes, but they're not doing it, and it's not that the teachers are bad, the administration is just, it's a safety net for them to go to the school too, but there's other problems they face. I live in Ambridge, and some of you heard Ambridge in the summer, we were there. But one person contacted me asking me for help for ESL, because the kids are acting up. And she's like, they're not bad, but all the teachers, well, this is specific school is not in Ambridge, but around and say, they're acting up and they think they're bad. I said, they're not bad. One, they don't speak the language. Two, probably the teacher, not her fault, doesn't know how to deal with the ESL. And they're helping each other, because when you're with another Latino and you don't speak, you're helping translate. And most of those kids at the age of 4 are translating for their parents. So how do we prepare them? Yeah, and like I bring my son, probably a lot of you, and we're in a situation where we had the privilege. How do we reach those areas outside the city where my husband is from, up north? How do you bring that in? How you bring that knowledge? And that's my biggest, question. In the city, I'm here in a bubble and I can find information I need. But I know when I ask him, I said, did you talk, what empires did you talk about? He goes, oh, Egypt and Greek. And I'm like, what about in Asia? What about South America? What about, so how, even then there's that gap. But now it's an urgency because there's bigger gap.
I would be less concerned with what he is not learning in school right now, of what is he looking at in social media, and because most of people this age are consuming the news and the conversation about current events through social media. And I have a 13-year-old, and in her school, they do talk about these things. I guess it's a Catholic school, so there's always like the Catholic sort of perspective on things. More, I don't know, missionary, benevolent, sort of caring, and very pro-immigrant perspective. But most of the conversations that we have, and she's not on TikTok or anything like that, because I'm a terrible mother and I want to, but she sees it from other friends, it's through social media. So I would be more concerned about what type of content, and how are we not being effective in placing content and generating content that it's easy to consume for people their age, that are the ones that are going to be voting and are not being reinforced by those, and it's not being reinforced by those algorithms. That might, and I think young people pay more attention to that than they would ever pay to their social studies teacher.
That's true. I would add that if you are going to talk to your kids about it, there are a lot of resources out there. It has to be developmentally appropriate. The kids are seeing and hearing a lot of things. I will tell you that my son has heard me talking, and he's concerned that because I'm naturalized, that something's going to happen. You have to be careful. One, kids hear everything, regardless of whether you're trying to be silent or not. But two, you have to be developmentally appropriate when you're having these conversations, and there are a lot of resources out there. I used to work at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. They have a lot of resources about how to have conversations on difficult topics. We have some resources on our websites. Look to the organizations that are working with the particular ages. Schools already have a lot on their plates. Not just that, but you're dealing with individuals with their own biases, their own backgrounds, and their own histories and perspectives. So be careful about who you put in front of your kids, or what screens you let them look at, especially right now, but make sure that you're not adding trauma to an environment that's already full of trauma.
I am terribly not an appropriate mom, and the conversations that my children are a part of, you just don't even want to. Once, someone said to us that there was a movie about racism and said, no, we don't let our children see that because we don't want them to be exposed to these conversations about racism that early. And I'm like, well, some of us don't have that choice because that it's, and that brings me to something that you were saying, and I understand what you're trying to say. I just have to be frustrated how we are expected always to tiptoe around conversations of white supremacy. And it's always been asked of us to be mindful of others' opinions, to not be upfront, to not be confrontational, and at the same time have to tolerate that our communities are being completely trampled and oppressed. So I think that at some point this is important, and in certain circumstances, I'm not the person to do it. I would not be that diplomat. But I also think that part of what needs to be learned is that these are legitimate conversations, and that we do not need to be going about.
Good. One more question, Randall, well, two more questions, because you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, sure.
Randall, why don't you go first, then I'll.
So I was at Occupy Pittsburgh. I lived at the camp for 3 months, including in the bitter cold. But we didn't have a strategic plan. We did not learn from history. What you were talking about in terms of a concerted, well-planned, coordinated resistance, mutual aid, strategic policy. So I would say I agree with Michael. We're going to need those of us who have privilege and need to put ourselves on the line. But we really need to study history. What has worked in terms of resistance? We need to coordinate. Occupy Pittsburgh tore itself apart, but fighting over all kinds of ideological differences without really thinking about what were we trying to achieve? What were the policies we were fighting for? How are we going to effectively fight for them? And so I would say, if you're going to risk yourself, make sure that you are thinking about planning for mutual support for everything from food to rest. Like we were so sleepless that we became kind of half crazy, right? So mutual self-care, risk planning, strategy, thinking through the long term, learning from others who've been through these struggles. We have a wide body of history of people who have resisted fascism. Let's learn from their failures and their successes.
Randall's, and then we can.
Pick Randall's. There's one more over here, though, if you can both be.
Actually,
Sorry.
I'll try to be quick and just that actually, I teach a large lecture course on the history of the Third Reich and bring it up to the contemporary moment. One of the things I say at the beginning of the semester is that it's in the fall and you're going to go home for Thanksgiving. And if you call that uncle across the table a fascist, you've lost. So I can only echo, please know what it is that you're saying.
Yes.
And who you're saying it to. Right? I think one of the things about privilege is that the best sign of privilege is to actually think that there is no conflict, or that you don't have to be touched by conflict. That part of the point of privilege is to be freed from that kind of conflict that exists in the world. And I think one of the things that is also important to understand for a moment that might be hopeful, but also a little bit depressing, is that we live in a world in which there has been constant struggle and we have to learn from each other. So I think one of the things that I'm seeing happen here right now is people my age and older are on the streets, right? in order to actually take the place of people who can't be there in some ways. And they're not singing great songs for the younger generations, but they're in communication with the younger generations. And when I was coming of age politically, people said, oh, you're an egocentric generation. The 60s is the way that this is how we protested. You don't know how to do it. And yet we struggled against apartheid. We struggled against AIDS. We struggled against so many different things that we call coalition politics and solidarity. And I think the best thing for us all is to think about what in the positions that we're in that we can do from the position of power that we have. And so it's good to be a student. You have powers that a professor doesn't have, which sounds strange. But it's also good to be a professor and to do the kind of work that we have here. But know that you're in community. When I think back on the Third Reich, we are so not there at all. This is not the Third Reich. And one of the most important things I can tell you is imagine a better future. Because I'm also a film scholar, and when I watch what you're watching, I see apocalyptic visions of either zombies or people genetically tested individuals putting themselves into rockets and exiting the world. And if those are our primary visions for our future, that's a problem for us. So what you consume things that give you visions of hope. And it is a struggle right here in this room to be hopeful, but that is the most important thing. And the way that you do that is by being in community. And no kings, whatever you say about it, there are people who are out on the streets who never went out on the streets before, and they have their grandchildren with them. There are communities that are being built in the suburbs, in places where people have been living in isolation, and suddenly they know, and they're going to have face-to-face meetings with each other. Those are very, very important gestures that are happening at this particular moment. And Nathan, they help us learn how to speak to the uncle across the table, right? To actually realize that the farmers and the truckers in this country who voted for Trump, suffering under Trump, and that's the thing that we need to be also understanding and communicating about with them. So I'm sorry, that's not a.
What I want to say that what's happening in Minnesota is extremely important. It is extremely important because I don't think there are generations of people in this country that have never seen so many white people being trampled and taken from their houses, from their cars, arrested and abused by the government this way. So people lived through George Floyd. Some people might have seen, the LA riots, but I think that these images that are coming out of Minnesota are important at this time. And I think that I'm hopeful. I also don't think we're in the third Reich. And I'm hopeful because I actually tend to be, so I don't know, more Star Trek than post-apocalyptic. And I said something to my husband this morning because yesterday morning when we were on Apple TV, and I said it always amazes me that and I love that Ted Lasso's last season ended, I don't know, 3 years ago, and it continues to be like the third most watched series on Apple TV, right? Because there's something, it makes me think that there's something hopeful about that. But I think that we need to pay a lot of attention of what's going on in Minnesota. And we need to learn from it. And as you were saying, we'll learn to learn from it, and we need to use it intelligently going forward. Because I think this is more important I think this is the most important thing that it's happening. And I think the government's response, it's going to be what you're saying, even more carnivalesque, more like carnival-like than we we would have thought was reasonable. I think that they are preparing for a yet more unreasonable and violent offense, as Mike was saying. And this could be a moment. There are moments where you are moments of shift. I want to think that this might be one of those incisions.
Unlike at the end of my classes where everybody's packing up and ready to go, nobody's moving yet, so one last question here.
Hey, Scott, can I just, sorry, I don't want to cut you off. I just, sorry, but next week, on the 29th, my center, the European Studies Center, is staging a roundtable with the deputy head of the EU delegation here. And
That's gonna be fun.
that'll be fun. And it gives you a chance to actually ask questions about the international legal order and stuff that we're talking about here. And ask about Greenland and other things. So it's going out on social media, just last minute news about that. So I would encourage you to look to that as another stage from here.
I'll advertise one more thing that was on the line of looking for hope, a few hopeful things. The center is also putting on its annual festival. What year number? What is this? 43rd festival in the end of March 21st.
Yeah, the purpose is to bring people, community together to feel that you belong. Last year, we were not sure if to do it or not, but a lot of people say no to come. And we make sure we talk to the Pitt police. They were very well there. So people felt included. They felt like an inclusive place. It felt like a welcome place. And that's the purpose of the festival, because right now the mentality is like, well, we need spaces. We need spaces like this. We need spaces that welcome us. We need spaces that talk about things that we might not want to talk about and make it a reality and plan. So so thank you.
My name's John. I'm an undergraduate Spanish student here at Pitt. One of the main themes that I saw from my experience as an interpreter in a public health clinic was a fear of authority kind of translating into resistance of social integration. So my question is mainly for Ankur. How can, what kind of city outreach initiatives are in place for not just immigrant protection, but also immigrant integration? And then how can they be strengthened following these federal objectives to combat, as Monica said, increased feelings of isolation and social abandonment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think first to acknowledge that we definitely do live in an frequently interconnected society, but some of our byproducts of whether it's federal action or social media creates a very isolationist kind of structure. We all feel very isolated. And some of the points previously, the biggest thing that we can do is recognize that we're all really different. We all have varying levels of privilege, but we can use that to organize to kind of community. In all of the news stories that you see around ICE, and rightfully so, you see the pain or the unconstitutionalness of their actions, or the pain that their actions bring about. You see deaths, you see violence, but you also see communities that throw ICE to the corner. You also see those jurisdictions that have banded together to prevent that microaggression, whatever it might look like. And in a place like here, that where I feel like I was attracted to people's respect for each other's hard work, and that everybody did come from a different place, but that they were here to prove themselves. I think about how we can all kind of be closer with each other and kind of bridge some of these gaps. So whether it is somebody who's using their car to help bring folks to and from certain places, whether it's signing up for to be a legal observer in courtrooms or out in public, and whether it's somebody who is meeting their neighbors for the first time and seeing how they can help support each other, like that's community. That's what we should all be striving to do. We live in a small enough but diverse enough place where that can actually happen. We have many historical examples right here in Pittsburgh of that happening. What can the city do? I I'm thinking of a few things. First would be, the things I mentioned before, those language access initiatives, making the city and its services and its programs actually accessible. It's economic security. So whether it's, trying to facilitate workforce development, small business growth, generational wealth-being programs, like that's something the city can do. But to the point about the city's interactions, with public safety involved. And especially in those public safety environments where you have competing law enforcement interests and you've got a lot of people in that space. The city has a responsibility more than just its non-collaboration, its 287 non-collaboration agreement, right? It's in those moments with a police officer and a federal immigration official and somebody who is otherwise on the losing end of those interactions. It's understanding what trainings, for instance, what priorities our local police has in those interactions. The protect and serve is, to put it really simply, and I think accurate. I think it's to rely on de-escalation trainings, to rely on, what your version or what the version of the city that the people want, and implementing them. So I think the city can definitely build on some of its statements, but I think it also has a responsibility to equip each one of the 3,000 people that work for it and its public safety departments with the tools necessary to actually materialize those policy goals and to speak, the way that we talk and, act the way.
I was gonna give everybody 30 seconds to say as a wrap up. Michael, something you wanted to.
30 seconds. Okay, I have 6 points. I can do it in under a minute. I don't know about 30 seconds. Under a minute. First of all, on what the city can do. If I knew anybody who had the mayor's ear, I'd be asking them to ask the mayor to think about when push comes to shove, is he going to be on the side of order or democracy? Historically, hasn't been the side of democracy that our public officials have been on. Second, Helen, yes, thank you. Third, about the youth. Yeah, I hear it, but also there's a thing we have to face. And I hear people all the time like, oh, where are the young people at these protests? Why aren't they? And I made a joke about the songs earlier. But here's the thing. Young people showed up in force to protest genocide, and we suspended and expelled them and arrested them and ruined their futures and prosecuted them. Why should they turn out now? We have work to do to fix this problem, right? And that has to be faced. And I know people find it, controversial, but like, they did what they were supposed to do. We failed them. Point 3. That was point 3. Point 4, see, I'm zooming through these. It's not the Third Reich. I take the point, and I do think we have to look for hopefulness. But the great lesson of comparative history is that next time will be different. So we also have to keep that in mind, right? It's not going to be a replay, whatever it's going to be. That's good news and bad news, right? That means we could be more, but it also means we have the option, we have the possibility still to find a way. Fifth point, what can we do? Super simple. Show up. People think I have to fix it myself. I have to found the organization. I have to do a heroic thing. All these good people are already done it. Just show up for something. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. Show up and you'll feel better. Search shows. You'll feel better if you show up and do stuff with them. Last point on educating ourselves. If I could recommend one book to everybody in this moment, 5 point. 10% of the people who voted for Zoran Mandani had voted for Trump 1 year prior. Right? So things are fluid. Feeling to the understanding what's really going on and what its true causes are, and then being able to act on that is important. With that in mind, the one book I would recommend to everybody, and I think you can get a free PDF online because it's in the public domain, and if not, you can just steal one like everybody else does. Karl Polanyi's The Great Transformation. Absolutely essential. Thanks.
Thank you. Nate?
Show up, and I would say if you have time, you have energy, invest it in the space where you feel like you're most equipped to do that. Whether that's politically, whether that's relationally, go up for that. I think I'm more of a relational person, so I'm always saying like LCC needs volunteers, you know, Casa San Jose, observers with Jaime organization.
Line dignity.
Yeah, Frontline Dignity, that's right. There's faith-based organizations. Come talk to Ankur about the Welcoming Communities call. And there's over 300 people on a mailing list from the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs that are constantly communicating what's going on in the areas of the services that they're providing, areas of need, and even job opportunities. Get on that mailing list. Well.
Okay.
Yeah, just to echo some of the fellow panelists' words, but also my own, just for that, there are many points in time that would have required us to, you know, make a connection, be connected, stay connected. This is one of those times. And there isn't one person in this room, let alone in this city, that can, you know, flip a switch. That's okay. We can work together to flip that switch. That's what's required of us. I'm a new uncle. I've been thinking a whole lot about what duty means. I think thinking about your family in that sort of regard is a helpful exercise in this space. Think about what you can do for your fellows. It's about duty. So I thank you for your 2 minutes. Come talk to me.
30 seconds, let me see. Watch how you talk in front of kids. Trauma in the lifetime. Follow people lifetime. Ways of talking to the kids. You want them educated, but you also want them to have a good emotional foundation. The second thing is you can't do this work without having hope. You have to. Part of what they want is for us to shut down. And I will tell you, if you had talked to me in January of last year, I was shut down. I was shut down. Because I've been doing this work in gender-based violence for over 20 years. And it was heartbreaking to see what was going on. But you have to keep going. And do what I do. Find the joy where you find it. I go to our children's programs. I talk to my son. I play video games with him online. You have to find your joy in order to continue seeing the BS that is going on and making sure that you're there.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful. I mean, I still am. There's a salsa song that says that los buenos son muchos más. And I totally believe that. There's more of us. And we have to show up.
Thank you all very much. Excuse me. Stay warm out there. And keep up the good fight.